all of you. And yeah, so Mirza Sahib Beg is a gold medalist graduate of Nalsar, University of Law, Hyderabad. He's a former president of the University Students' Union and a recipient of the Vice Chancellor's Medal for the Best Male Graduate. He's currently based in the UK, where he is a candidate for MPP at Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford. He regularly contributes on issues concerning Kashmir through seminars, writing, and organization aimed at dialogue on legal and political issues of Kashmir. After the decriminalisation of homosexuality, when there was a panel discussion at SOAS, a group of Kavita Krishnan was there, as was Mirza, and a group of other activists, a group of right-wing activists walked in and they started chanting "Gay for JNK." And that has become, that particular incident has been cited a lot of times over and over again to show how homo-nationalist rhetoric is being deployed in order to pinkwash what is the atrocities in Kashmir. So with that, I want to leave the platform open to Mirza. Please take on, Mirza.
Thank you, Ekabali. So Ekabali, just let me know if I'm not audible at any point. Just drop me a message on. You can jump in and let me know. So
Okay.
thank you for having me over here. And today I've been asked to discuss Article 370 and Section 377. And there's a lot of discourse that has come out on this topic, especially from the BJP, because they have tried to leverage all kinds of propaganda to justify their moves in Kashmir. So they have tried to show that the new deal that they're trying to give to Kashmir with the annexation is much better for the people of Kashmir, and that India is qualified to make that decision on behalf of Kashmiris, irrespective of what the Kashmiris think. And in a manner, they try to infantilize the Kashmiri people into this caricature of a group of people who do not know what they want and cannot decide for themselves. Now, just to quickly touch upon, as Kabari said, I'm a Kashmiri lawyer, and in my limited capacity, I have tried to set the record right on the propaganda that has been employed by the BJP repeatedly on all the moves in Kashmir. Even right now, last week, 2 weeks ago, they changed the domicile law. Before that, there have been mining rights which have been given to Indians, non-Kashmiris, in contravention with established procedure before August 5. So I can touch upon all those issues, any question that you have on legal developments, political developments in Kashmir. Now, in this session, I will just to outline what I will be discussing. I'll talk about two instances where I've personally witnessed the propaganda that is being utilized and how it is being deployed by the Indian government. I will discuss the position of law, legally, where we stand on LGBTQ rights in Kashmir, the criminalization, decriminalisation, what is the actual position of law. And I'll also touch upon how I see parallels with what India is doing on Kashmir internationally. Other countries have also done in similar positions, and where I'll discuss the pinkwashing of Kashmir. And most importantly, I want to touch upon how the rights of marginalized people are being used as some sort of a bargaining chip, because you cannot use the rights of marginalized people in order to subjugate other people as well. You cannot ensure anyone's rights if you suspend the rights of other people. So quickly to touch upon the two instances that I told you about. The first is what Ekabali had spoken about the event at SOAS. I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. But before that, I want to touch upon a session that I attended at the UK Parliament in the House of Lords over here, where Panda, who is currently the national vice president of the BJP, he's been one of the spokespersons as well. He was attending that session, and the Henry Jackson Society had organized that. For those of you who don't know, the Henry Jackson Society is an ultra right-wing group in the UK, and they had facilitated Panda to come and speak before the House of Lords. This is interesting because it also shows how the BJP is right now trying to build a global coalition of the right wing. You'll also notice this theme in, I don't know if you have followed the news, where a lot of MEPs, members of the European Parliament, had been invited to Kashmir, while India's own elected leaders, were not allowed to enter Kashmir. But MEPs, specifically from right-wing and far right-wing parties of Europe, had been invited to come to Kashmir. But in Kashmir, they are trying to force normalization, or at least give people a facade by making them look through a keyhole and show them, okay, you can only look at this room in this house and you can see normalcy, so everything must be normal in all other rooms of this house as well. Of course, internationally, these arguments have not been bought, but at a national level, Indians seem to have accepted the fiat accompli, or they have cheered for the subjugation of Kashmiris using various arguments that the BJP itself has come forward with. And I often say that these are very lazy arguments because it's extremely easy to debunk them by just a simple Google search. But for a country where a vast majority of people is educated on a WhatsApp university, that is too much to expect. So Jay Panda came to the House of Lords and he spoke over there about why it was necessary to amend Article 370, and he used the argument of LGBTQ rights as well over there.
Mirza, hello.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, but a lot of people from Discord are saying they can't hear you there.
They can't hear me on Discord. Let me just check again. My mic is working on Discord. So yeah, about the event at the UK Parliament, what Jay Panda had tried to do was he openly said that 377 was not applicable in the decriminalisation of homosexuality was not applicable in the Parliament, and there was no one who challenged him on this, even though this was a verifiably false statement. So at the end of the event, I stood up and questioned him on this, and I told him that you are wrong on law, you are also wrong on fact. And despite me having a back and forth argument with him, at the end of which he said that, oh, well, that's just my opinion. And the moment someone says that's just my opinion, they've already lost the argument, because there's no, you can't argue after that. So he said that this matter is now before the Supreme Court, so we'll see what they decide. Although on 377, it's not before the Supreme Court. The court has already decided. And the next day, he went to Oxford University, where he had a debate with Sitaram Yechury at this Oxford Union. And over there also, he repeated the same arguments. The second instance where we saw this play out, the propaganda machinery play out, was on 5th of October, which Ekabali had mentioned, there was an event at SOAS University, and the event was titled Resisting Fascism, Building Solidarities, India, Kashmir and Beyond. So while Kavita Krishnan had just started speaking, 5 men, they were masked, they were wearing, they were fairly well-built, stocky men. They all barged into the room and they were shouting, "Gay for JNK, gay for JNK," as if and they tried to disrupt the event in order to paint everyone who was speaking over there or who was present over there, to paint us as regressive, homophobic people who oppose the decriminalisation of LGBTQ, right? Oppose the decriminalisation of homosexuality, because we support, we oppose the amendment that has been made by Government of India on Article 370. Now, it's interesting to see all of this because this is playing out more in an international audience. You don't see this as much in India, the argument of LGBTQ rights being used in India. In India, the discourse is more about terrorism and how Article 370 was promoting it, how there are certain groups in India, certain groups in Kashmir who are benefiting because of Article 370's presence, and how its amendment is now going to usher in this great era of development in Kashmir. So it's interesting to see and analyze these shifts in language that India makes use of to control the perception towards challenges to India's authority in Kashmir. Because if in any place in India, the one thing that's happening in Kashmir is that there's a challenge to India's authority. So it's interesting to see how India deals with that challenge. Now, Kashmir is usually portrayed as an issue of anti-Hindu violence, and they employ terms like Islamic radicalism. But at the international level, the currency for this kind of language, the currency for Islamic radicalism and Islamic terrorism is fairly diminishing, because there's now been nearly 20 years of the war on terror where all of this language, this rhetoric was utilized to the hilt. So we are now witnessing the emergence of a new kind of language in the international front from India, which is based on sexual politics. And this language is very similar to pink-washed racist stereotyping of Arabs by Israelis to imply that Israelis or Indians are civilized, whereas Arabs, Muslims or Kashmiris and their supporters are violently homophobic people. So I'll come back to address this point in a while, but I quickly want to touch upon the position of law as where it stands in Kashmir. So on September 6, 2018, the Supreme Court of India decriminalized sexual relations between consenting adults. Within just one day of this judgment, the Times of India published the Times of India published a poorly researched claim by Arti Tikku, which is the link that I just sent to you on the chat, that LGBTQs will have to wait for decriminalisation in Jammu and Kashmir, since this judgment did not extend to Jammu and Kashmir. The report also made unsubstantiated claims about Kashmir's religious and cultural orthodoxy and its Islamist militancy. So these are all dog whistle phrases that are used to, and they have increasingly grown. They have been interwoven into India's language on Kashmir, because it enables India. It gives India the opportunity to describe Kashmir with this sense of ostensible superiority, so that they can not only inflict a war on the aberrant Kashmiri subject, but also on the putative and moral directives of Islam. Now, such a narrative, it just seeks to paint Kashmiris as people who require subordination for emancipation, and it legitimizes coercive and oppressive instrumentality from India. In the early 90s, Indians would often outrightly deny the existence of any human rights violations in Kashmir. But over the years, as the magnitude of those human rights violations grew so much that they became absolutely undeniable, we have now come to a point where India does not outrightly deny the human rights violations that take place in Kashmir, but instead tries to justify it. And often, in most commonplace rhetoric, they say that, "Laton ke boodh baaton se nahi mante." So these Kashmiris are very violently regressive people. They are irrational people. So they have to be subjugated in order to teach them the values of democracy and modernity. It's quite ironical that these statements are made in the same line. But on the legal point, Kashmir had the Ranbir Penal Code until August 5, which was passed in 1932. That is our penal code. Whereas India has the Indian Penal Code, which has been passed in 1860. Both of these legislations are more or less similar. In fact, in many sections, they're exactly the same, because both have come from colonial legislations. India's 1860 Indian Penal Code is a colonial legislation given by Britain. And at that time, certain kinds of sexual expression were seen as primitive, and they're seen as regressive. So the trans identity was criminalized in that. And India continued to abide by this colonial interaction for nearly 70 years, even after India's independence. Even though the law itself had changed in the parent country, the colonizer's own country, the law had already changed. But India continued to abide by that law. Now, on August 5, 2019, before amending of Article 370, the laws made by Parliament of India could not extend directly to Kashmir. But even before the amendment of Article 370, even before August 5, any law that was passed or made by the Supreme Court of India would directly apply to all courts in India, including the Jammu and Kashmir High Court. So even though law made by Parliament of India does not directly extend to Kashmir, law made by the Supreme Court of India can extend to Kashmir also. And this is the position under Article 141 of India's own constitution. If any of these people, if Jay Panda or BJP's propagandists, if they ever even open a book on this, whether they open India's own constitution or they even Google this, you can see former legal, many legal experts who have already opined on this. The Jammu and Kashmir Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir High Court, he himself has said that this Section 377 will have deemed application in Jammu and Kashmir. The former Jammu and Kashmir High Court Judge Hasnain Masoodi, he's also on record stating that the Supreme Court's judgment on Section 377 is now implementable in J&K. Advocate Saurav Kirpal, who was part of the legal team that fought for legal rights of the LGBTQ community in the Supreme Court, he has also accepted this position. And there's also a legal precedent from a 1995 judgment which validates this. So Section 303, to give you a little background on this, Section 303 of the Indian Penal Code had been held to be violative of the Indian Constitution under Article 14 and 21. When it was struck down, there was a question whether Section 303 of the Ranbir Penal Code is also struck down automatically. So in the judgment of Jankar Singh versus State, it's a 1995 judgment of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, Justice Rizvi has observed that when the highest court in the land gives an exposition of law, it has to be taken as if it was always the position of law. All pending matters, whether at trial stage or in appeals, have to be disposed of accordingly. So similarly, Just applying all of this logic from the Constitution of India, from the opinions given by the Chief Justice of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, judges of the court, legal scholars, the precedent of Jankar Singh, all of these put together imply that Section 377 of the Ranbir Penal Code, which is in pari materia with Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, it is also equally decriminalized, just like it was done in India. Now, any person who's a genuine gay rights activist would obviously know the position of law on this. However, the masked people who barged into SOAS the day we had the session over there, and all of these people, Jay Panda or anyone else, who are so pained at this position, they are all pained over a position of law which does not exist. And in any case, even if they feel that Section 377 of the Ranbir Penal Code is still discriminatory, they are free to file a petition before the Jammu and Kashmir High Court to have an order passed to this effect. They can even seek a clarificatory judgment from the Jammu and Kashmir High Court to interpret whether this position still exists or not. But instead of doing that, they choose to completely amend Article 370 to annex Kashmir, to revoke our autonomy, and justify it on this basis, which is a wholly absurd logical premise. It's also very important to note that this is the BJP that we're talking about. The Indian Penal Code has criminalized homosexuality for nearly 7 decades, and the Parliament of India has never legalized it. This was a process done by the courts. But if you look at the BJP leaders' own statements as to what their position is on decriminalization of homosexuality, Subramaniam Swamy, Yogi Adityanath, Rajnath Singh, Ram Madhav, they have all openly made homophobic statements. And even the government of India's own stand before the United Nations, it clearly elaborates India's homophobic stand at an international level. In the United Nations, there was a vote on providing of spousal benefits for LGBTQ people, and India didn't vote in favor of it. You can also look at Bipin Rawat's statement. The video that I shared is of Bipin Rawat, who's the army chief, speaking at a press conference where he's effectively saying that homosexuality is an ethically wrong thing to happen. And he's also saying that the army has its own set of laws. At the same time, he begins by saying that, the Supreme Court of India has passed this judgment. We are not above the Supreme Court. It applies to us also. But the very next breath he says, we have our own set of laws that apply to you don't apply to us. We are not allowed to form unions. You are allowed to form unions. And by that logic, by the logic of formation of unions, the bar on formation of union has a different logic to it in the army. But a bar on the presence of homosexuals in the army does not fit that logic. But this is the statement he has made. Yogi Adityanath has openly made statements that homosexuality makes no difference between man and animal. Subramaniam Swamy has made statements saying that homosexuality is a genetic flaw. And all this aside also, the Transgender Persons Protection Bill, which was passed in the Lok Sabha on the same day that Kashmir's annexation took place, that Article 370, and it was amended on August 5, the same day the Lok Sabha passed the Transgender Protection Bill, which is a very regressive position. It degrades the position of rights for transgender people by restricting the kind of occupations that they are permitted to engage in. So all of this points to the fact that India's own stand politically is not clear on homosexuality. It is the courts that have taken that stand, and that judgment applies to Kashmir also. So this is the legal framework. Now I want to come to pinkwashing of Kashmir itself, because one would this whole phenomenon, it begs the question as to why it's happening, because anyone can do a simple Google search anywhere, like the way I countered Jay Panda in the House of Lords. Any person from the BJP can be countered online or in person when they make such statements. So it begs the question as to why they still outrightly and blatantly do these things. Now, the instrumentalisation of queer rights by Indians right now, it is merely an exploitation of the LGBTQ identity. And it's being done to pinkwash a systemic denial, a structural denial of the Kashmiris' rights, while being oblivious to India's own emphatic masculinism and homophobia. So this is a form of violence which is intended to subjugate and render Kashmiri voices as invisible. In light of the brutal imposition, the brutal oppression that Kashmiris face. And that oppression is something which is not limited to people who are not queer. Anyone, irrespective of whether they are queer, male, female, whatever their political lineage is, everyone is equally subject to that oppression. When Kashmir was under lockdown, well before India was under lockdown, this current coronavirus lockdown, that lockdown applies to everyone. When the internet is cut down in Kashmir, it applies to everyone. When there is a rampant abuse of force by the police or the CRPF, where they beat the public, it applies to everyone. Whether the protesters are homosexual or heterosexual, it doesn't matter. So every person is facing that oppression equally. And of course, there is an internal oppression as well, because at a larger level within Kashmir also, homophobia has not gone anywhere, even if it has been decriminalized. Just like in India, even though homosexuality has been decriminalized, homophobia still exists. And that is a social issue which has to be tackled. Now, it seems that Indians are making an attempt right now to appear progressive, to appear modern and tolerant by posturing a Hindu nationalist ruled India as gay friendly, supposedly unlike Kashmir. This is quite reminiscent of 2005, when American marketing companies, marketing executives, they tried to rebrand Israel's image. And this the campaign was called Brand Israel, in which they were trying to depict Israel as modern by harnessing LGBTQ identities to reposition Israel's global image. In 2011, the Israeli government was accused of exaggerating its record on LGBTQ rights to cover up the ongoing human rights abuses in West Bank and Gaza. So we can see where the Indian government is pulling a page out of, whose book the Indian government is pulling a page out of. Now, even if we were to incorrectly assume that India's LGBTQ policies are more progressive than Kashmir's, India's violation of human rights and the annexation of Kashmir cannot be ignored on that basis. I will conclude with this note that India, with its entrenched caste system, Hindu chauvinism, misogyny, and systemic homophobia, in addition to being a denier of the rights of the Kashmiri people, cannot pass itself off as a liberator to anyone. These arguments are just being used to obfuscate the narrative. Because if you do not engage in these arguments, then you will have to ask the question, what do the people of Kashmir want? The moment you ask that question, anywhere in Kashmir, you will get the answer, because Kashmiris are fairly unequivocal about their opinion on this. But because India does not want to engage or confront that question, it is important to delegitimize the identity of the Kashmiri from the get-go. So that is why all these things are being done. And I think I've spoken for longer than I had planned to speak, but I'm happy to take any questions that we have, and anything else that you feel I need to elaborate on in this discussion, or any of the legal developments that are taking place on Kashmir.